so sorry, so I was almost right. So you select the type of graph was column, and for some reason it automatically selected this pattern, this horizontal type of line. If you drag across the bar, you'd have the more typical type of parrot t-test graph where they're represented like that. You can either plot the mean with the standard deviations, but what's more typical is to plot the mean with the standard error of the mean. Some people also prefer plotting the mean with the 95% confidence intervals. I can discuss the pros and cons of doing that separately, but for now we're going to do the means with the standard errors of the means. Okay, and then the next thing I'm going to do is show you how to make this graph look more presentation or publication worthy. So first thing you want to do is what's the point of this graph? You want to highlight differences between experimental conditions. So that means that you do not have to actually show every single like from 0 to 2. Often it's acceptable to start the graph from 0.5 or whatever value is lowest. So that's one thing to do. The other thing to do would be to make these graphs clear so you can see the error bars on both sides, not on just the one side. So to do that, you hit Format Graph, select Global to change all the data sets, and you'd like to select the error bars such that it is both, not just above or below, both. And the style usually without the not this one. This is much more much better. And then you would go ahead and probably have them clear rather than filled. So you don't want them to have pattern. Pattern graphs are not really helpful most often. So I've just gone ahead and filled them all with white now, which is so that you can see your actual error bars. Now, usually it's okay, especially when you're making a poster, to make it less dry, you have some form of color. So in this case, because this was cathodal stimulation, it's probably useful to think of it as gray, and then anodal would be red, maybe. So you go ahead and fill your stimulation condition with gray and then clear for your sham condition. So think about this logically. The border color should always be black, and the thickness should be about 1 point. Error bars should have the same thickness as your actual bars, and so that should make it a bit more attractive. And then you need to label your axes, obviously. So one thing that is useful to do is to actually title this, give the graph title something informative. So you go ahead and rename the graph title. So in this case, this is Cerebella Cathodal, and very nicely Graphpad would actually automatically rename all these. These are extra graphs that Graphpad creates. You can basically ignore them if they are not useful to you. So it's just a correlation in there between the sham and the stimulation condition. That's just Graphpad giving you extra bits of information. This is the one you, sorry, that's wrong. This is the one you want, so it's already created that. So now I'm just going to go into stylistic things like how to make a graph more visible, and opinions vary about this, so I'm just going to go and tell you what I've learned, which is basically what my old supervisor's preferences were. So if you notice, I've double clicked on the axes and hit on the tab titles and fonts. This is because I never ever use bold in all the number labels and all the axis titles or the graph titles, because bold simply makes things fatter, and when you have something either shrunk into a much smaller font in a publication, it typically makes it harder to read. So everything, unbold everything. So I'm just going to go regular all of these. And then you can go ahead and increase the size. So now I'm not labeling these axes first, because what I like to do is create a layout of different graphs. So sometimes that especially if your publication has a limit on the number of graphs you can insert. Sometimes it's useful to lay them out in a composite layout. So say for example, if you have one cerebellar cathodal condition here, for the metric simple condition, you basically redo the same graph, so the entire same process. It's useful to redo it by simply duplicating the whole family. So say I would like to, so these are for the metric simple condition only. I would like to redo everything the same way except for the metric complex data. So I just duplicate family, and it will do this, and I will just say my new sheet name is metric complex, and I'll rename it sensibly. So this one is metric simple, that one is metric complex. That's the only way the data are different, and obviously I need to clear this because this is actually not the actual data. So I'll go ahead and get the metric complex data, which is here, and then do the same thing as I showed you earlier. Where are we? Here, and here I need to actually have, oops, am I correct? Oh no, that's actually correct. So we need to actually have, that's probably wrong, so I need to correct that. So it's always good to double check your data before you plot them. I'm just checking right now. Basically we have one subject in this condition, participant number 81, who had no false alarms. Excuse me. So the columns don't correspond. So we need to account for that. So so essentially I need to have subject number 81 here. So 81, so the formula you apply, if you looked at the previous video, that's the formula apply if you have one subject that has no false alarms. Okay, so that corresponds. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and paste that in. These are the columns, these are the rows all correspond. So, okay, so here we have metric complex, and then this is sham, this is sham, and stimulation, and here we go. So essentially it created the same graph, the same analysis, but it's just repeated it. It's just done it automatically because you essentially duplicated the whole family, not just the one graph, not just the one table. You duplicated the analyses and the graphs. So this is your data here. So it will also duplicate the layout, which can be a bit confusing. I'll usually delete the layout because I usually make them manually rather than have it done automatically. So here I like to show this data here. So you can see that you need to, when you're presenting graphs, it's always good practice to have the axes the same. So I'm going to go ahead, because the range that people typically perform at is 0 to 3. So I'm just going to go ahead and go 0 to 3. So I've just double clicked on the axis, and then I said I do not want to automatically determine the range and the interval. I would like to specify it 0 to 3, and there we are. So that's essentially it for this cathodal. So this is cerebellar cathodal. This is very not helpful because Graphpad always likes to automatically bold things. And I just make one last tweak. And just make the borders always black for every subject. So I'm just going to do that for everything. It's just clearer that way. Borders are always black. Okay. It didn't look quite as I'd like it to be. Why is it not black? Maybe it's just my eyes. Okay.